1, 2, 3, 4. Those are numbers, but you already knew that. If you want to know what number you're going to pay each month for your car, use Kelley Blue Book My Wallet on Auto Trader. They're really good at numbers. Auto Trader.
Tonight's forecast, a freeze is coming.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Unequal Sequel. My name is Dave. I'm one of your two hosts for this very exciting podcast.
And I'm Rich, and I'm the other one of your two hosts of this exciting podcast. Think of me as Woody to Dave's Buzz. I'm a cowboy, and he's a sad, strange little man who has my pity.
Oh, thanks. The premise of Unequal Sequel is very simple. We ask our guests for their best ever sequel, worst ever sequel, and finally their dream sequel.
And of course, we often drift off course and just have a chat about movies in general, and in this one, life in general, really.
On today's episode, we are joined by Lewis Arnold.
Lewis is a TV and film director who you may know from his brilliant work directing Broadchurch, MisFits, Banana, Des, and most recently the hit BBC TV show Time, starring Sean Bean and Stephen Graham, and written by Jimmy McGovern, critically acclaimed. Everybody's absolutely loved it, and we managed to very, very luckily get hold of Lewis just before he started his next project.
Huge hit. Very excited to sit down with Lewis and chat all things sequels with him.
And these are Lewis Arnold's Unequal Sequels. Enjoy!
If you got offered a sequel as a director, how would you approach that? How do you approach it now, and how would you approach it if it was
sequel? I mean, it would depend. It would depend on the material. I think everything always depends on the material. I mean, look, the biggest kind of franchise in the world really is a series of sequels in many ways. They're not, and I'm talking about the Marvel franchise. I'm a huge comic book nerd. A lot of what we're talking about tonight, when you asked me, a lot of my choices have been around comic books and graphic novels and that world. And I think if you were going to go in and do anything, and one day I hope that's my aspiration really, is to be a part of the MCU, whether that's on TV now, because I think that we're at a point, and have been at a point for many years before Marvel got involved. I think we've been at a point for the last 10 years where story dictates format. So we are at a point now where I develop shows and projects, and at the start I don't necessarily go, I'm developing this as a film, or I'm developing this as a TV series or whatever. You kind of develop the story, and it kind of tells you what it wants to be, and then it is a film or it is a TV series. It's a 3-parter, it's a 6-parter, it's a returnable. I think that's a really great place that we've been in for a while now, where story can really dictate format. And I think that if I was you, when you're coming onto those kind of shows which are long-standing, you have to understand, you have to ignore a little bit what was done before, because you are you and you have to bring you to that project. But you have to have a huge understanding of the world, the story, the characters. Probably could, but I wouldn't recommend directing anything with Marvel unless you knew the layers and complexities of all the relationships and all the characters through the MCU. And I think that goes as far as the graphic novels. I think most directors that work in that world know the source material, and I think that's right. I mean, I think you have to do your work. You have to know the history of what it is. But then that also goes as, if you were going to direct Jaws 2 or anything really, I think, and I mean, I love Jaws 2, and also I kind of have a special affinity for it even more so now, because my editor's father directed it. So and Jono, and there's so many great stories about it. But even before I met Sasha and started working with Sasha, I've always loved Jaws 1 and 2. And I think 3, there's parts of 3 that I really like. But as a kid growing up, I mean, Jaws 1 is probably one of my favorite movies. But 2, I always used to remember them on how the shark is killed. Like, that's kind of like how I remembered those movies. And there's loads of great stuff about that second one. The whole sequence at the end where the kids go off in the boats, they're hunted by the shark, is a great set piece. There's so much amazing stuff in the second one. But what I mean by what I'm saying is that even films like that, and speaking to people like Jono who's made them, you have to understand the source material. You have to understand. So I think first and foremost, if you ever approach a sequel, I think you have to love the first one, but you have to also understand the source material, but also have an idea of what it is you want to do with it. because you can't just repeat the formula. I think that's where you can slip up, where something feels slightly formulaic, or, you know, and horror films in particular can fall into that, I think, because they can use sort of the same templates that they've used previous films to create sequels, and it's about trying to keep something fresh and original as well.
I think horror and comedy kind of fall into that. Like, comedy sequels are all next to impossible, because how are you funny again, freshen it up that much, but while still keep the same characters without telling all the same jokes all over again? That's where very few comedy sequels that are successful.
Is that because certain comedies and certain horrors aren't written to be more than one movie? And that's generally where a lot of things fall apart. Is, you know, like Marvel is such a success, and I talk about Marvel because if you think about it as a franchise, they're 10 years now, 11 years. They have the most sequels, the most spin-offs of everything, and it's not really a spin-off. A lot of them focus on separate characters, but if you just took the Avengers and all the characters that figure in the Avengers, then there's enough movies there for you to judge that. But the thing that works about that is it's a continuation of a longer story that exists in the graphic novels and the comics. And I feel like that sometimes the problem is, you know, you have a hit movie, a hit comedy, or a hit horror, or a hit whatever, and it's like there's such an appetite for a sequel that the story's stretched in ways that the audience don't go with it or don't believe it. And the filmmakers, I think, sometimes don't believe it. Whereas films where I think the sequels are successful feels like there was more story to tell. Yeah,
absolutely. And I'm glad you didn't mention Jaws 4, because I think me and David,
The Revenge. I always
bad.
remember. I haven't seen it I've seen 1, 2, and 3. Like, I mean, I saw 1 and 2. I see 1 and 2 quite a lot because they're always on. They're always on telly. And I watched 3 about a year ago, and then 4. I haven't seen 4 for maybe 10 years. Yeah. But I always remember the scene where someone's on the top of the boat, hanging down, and the shark just kind of comes up, opens its mouth, and they drop in. And then I forgot that Michael Caine was in it.
And when someone said to him, "Have you actually seen Jaws 4?" and he went, "Nope, but I've seen the house it paid for."
Yeah. Well, you know, it's fair enough. Like, if you've got a family, and you know, it's easier for actors to sort of move on from a bad film, especially if they have a career already. But I think it's more trickier for crew who are judged maybe more harshly on that.
Do you remember the first sequel you saw, and what was the first sequel you got really excited about?
No, I don't remember the first sequel I saw. I mean, we grew up with an age of VHS where, like, you know, Gremlins 2 maybe, and things like that. I mean, I think I saw Gremlins 2 before I saw Gremlins 1. But the sequels were just a part of our life. They were always on telly. Yeah. They were always, you know, VHS. And maybe it was different for our parents. I remember being the most excited I remember the build up to the Phantom Menace and being in year 7 at senior school, and my oldest sister, because none of my family were interested, taking me. And I remember my mate at the time, David York, we were at school and he'd gone to America, and it was when films came out in America, like 4 months before they came out in the UK, and he'd seen it. And so for 4 months, he'd been telling me all this stuff about how amazing it was and how brilliant it was. And so I just got this and you know, the build up to that movie was so intense. And I remember going with my sister and just loving it. I would have been about 12. But I remember Phantom Menace, like, I know it got a lot of negative press, and look, it had a bad ride from, you know, like Simon Pegg openly and started, you know, spaced. There's whole streams of spaced about his hatred for the trilogy that George did.
That's always what I think of. I always think of Spaced when I hear
him burning his toys. Yeah.
Goes to the job centre and saying, "I got sacked," and she goes, "Phantom Menace."
That's great. Yeah. But I mean, I loved it. I was a kid and I loved it. And, you know, I think that there's that great thing in Spaced where he said, you know, someone says to him, you know, he says, "Yeah, but, you know, Jar Jar," and someone says, "Yeah, but the Ewoks," and he's like, you know, and it's like, I think it depends how old you are, who you are, but I really love Phantom Menace. But I just remember being so excited. I remember coming home, and I remember they did the little Kellogg's cornflakes things, and we used to make stop frame animations out of those. And I just remember that being super pumped about that movie. Maybe I was in year 9, maybe I was a bit older, but I just remember being super pumped. Yeah. And then seeing it like 2 or 3 times at the cinema.
I remember going to see that with my dad, mum, and my dad knows nothing about Star Wars, and he comes out at the end at Phantom Menace, and he goes, "So the little kid, that was Luke Skywalker, right?" And I was like, "No, Dad, bless you."
Well, I mean, I do remember the first sequel I saw, actually. Remember they re-released Star Wars? Yeah. Like 4 years before Phantom Menace came out, they did a re-release of all 3 films.
97, I think that was.
Yeah, and they did like pogs. They did like special pogs that I collected, and it was in a book. Tazoos, that was it. In the Walkers crisps, I collected them, and I didn't see New Hope, but I did go and see Empire Strikes Back, and as a kid, my favorite Star Wars movie was Return of the Jedi, which like people get really upset about because they're like, how can you like Return of the Jedi? But as a kid, like I loved Empire, but there was a lot of Empire that's like got bigger themes, and there's a lot of love themes around love, and there's much bigger thematics at play, about family and all this stuff. Whereas like Return of the Jedi kind of goes back to the basics, like a New Hope, and it's very much like kind of good and evil. The first sequence on Tatooine with the rescue of Han Solo, like that film, the end on Endor, the Palpatine, the whole movie just is so glorious. If I was going to put one on, I would always put Return of the Jedi on.
Oh, amen.
And I remember seeing Empire and Return at the cinema before Phantom Menace and like loving them, but I'd already kind of seen them, so nothing kind of compared to that kind of excitement of. But even as an adult, I mean, like, God, if you would have seen me, so I went to the press screening of Avengers Endgame, and me and Russell T Davies spent probably 6 or 7 months getting those tickets. In Infinity War came out, I just had my baby, and I saw it like 3 or 4 times at the cinema. We just had our first, and so I went to saw it, and then saw it again, and then we went and did Baby Club, and so my wife could watch it. And as soon as it came out, me and Russell were talking about it. He knows how much of a nerd I am, and obviously he wrote Doctor Who, and I think he just understands that mythology of that world. And so we always kept in touch, and then loads of the alumni from Banana ended up being in them. So Hannah's Ghost in Ant-Man and Wasp, and then Letitia Wright is obviously in Black Panther and Infinity War and Endgame. We've always kept in touch, and to the point that he was like, how do we get tickets? Like, can we bribe some of the cast? Like, how do we do this? And it just like, and then literally John Wardle at the NFTS knows how big of a nerd I am. And about a month before, he was like, I can get you a ticket. If you can get Russell T Davies to do a masterclass at the school, I'll get you tickets via Disney to the press screening. So I just literally, I hooked that up. And like the weeks leading up to that and Infinity War, but definitely Endgame, I have even as a sort of 35-year-old man at the time, I was so excited. And I was in LA literally the week after, and I went and saw it again in an American theater. And then I came back and saw it again. I saw it like 3 times. But that first time, I was one of the few, I jumped out of my seat at various points and had to be pulled back down, and I think that the fact that cinema can do that, and like you could argue Endgame is the greatest sequel of all time, because in many ways you could argue that Endgame as a sequel isn't just a sequel, it's kind of wrapping up 10 years worth of storyline. And with that in mind, Endgame is possibly one of the greatest feats in storytelling history in terms of its ability as a sequel, as a franchise, in what it does as a franchise. It's one of the greatest movies ever. And look, like, I know that loads of people aren't into Marvel, and there's you have the hardcore fans like myself, and then one of my friends who's a director can't stand all that stuff and has a real issue with it because he thinks it's ruining cinema. But I think there's a place for all of that, as long as we can still find places for things like Nightcrawler and more interesting indie cinema. That excitement that you get from a movie, I still get, and I think it's more palpable with a sequel because of the expectation and the buzz that creates than an original film. Like for example, Dune's coming out soon, and there's other films coming out soon that I'm excited about. But with a sequel, you've got such excitement and anticipation that movie going experience is just so exciting. Best screening I've ever been to of any movie. And even when the card came up and it said 5 years later, the gasp of air out of the room, everyone just went, there's no one expected that kind of like, which Marvel are going to get about 5 years of time. Like, they've been living with this. What a brave thing for the Russo brothers to do, and the writers to just go, you know what? People have been living with the sort of blip for 5 years. Boom, done. So, whoa, that was such a, killing Thanos in the opening sequence, cutting his head, all that stuff. It was so brilliantly conceived. I loved it. And look, I've got problems with it. Like, considering Ant-Man at one point says, we've only got enough for one trip and back of the pin particles. And then he uses a pin particle and he comes back. But then when he goes back to the past, he shrinks and grows loads of times to sort of get the stones. He's really small, isn't he? So you kind of go, well, how many did they actually have? Anyway, there's a few things like that, indiscretions like that, but I completely forgive them because the film is just joyous.
It was amazing.
It's not a documentary on time travel or on, you forgive it so much.
Endgame really good. But what's your pick if they don't make the grade? What is your number one best sequel ever today?
Me, I think the best sequel ever made, and there's loads of them. I mean, I Endgame would be there because I feel like it ties up not just one movie and it's not following on, it's kind of doing so much. There's other Marvel movies I think are great. I think Cap America Winter Soldier is an incredible follow-up and absolutely 1,000 times better than Cap America. Winter Soldier is completely where, for me, the whole Marvel franchise gear shifted into a different direction of films that were just not comic book movies, but because for me, Winter Soldier is a political thriller. It's phenomenal. But the film that I think for me as a film that kind of, when you compare it to the film that went before, and even just as a movie, I think it was probably in my top 5 favorite movies, is The Dark Knight. I mean, I think Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight is undoubtedly one of the greatest sequels ever, more so than Aliens, because I think Aliens and Alien, which, I thought about Aliens because I adore Aliens and I prefer it to Alien, but Alien they're different movies. You can't really compare them. Whereas The Dark Knight and Batman Begins, Batman Begins is a brilliant film and I adore it. I think that The Dark Knight, for me, just completely it goes beyond the comic book film. As a film, I think it's just brilliant. The Dark Knight is the only film, other than maybe Endgame, but even then not to the levels of The Dark Knight, but The Dark Knight is the only movie I've ever watched where I generally felt threat. I generally felt like the good guys weren't going to win, and that it was never going to be. In Endgame, it all kind of gets resolved and fixed to a certain extent. There are still losses, but in The Dark Knight, you generally feel that the threat and the intensity of the threat from the Joker is just, I just think that film is just a masterpiece. It is just outstanding.
But perhaps unsurprisingly, you're not the first person to pick Dark Knight. You're in quite good company. So we had Sean Walsh on episode 2, and Dark Knight was his favourite film as well. And I think we're going to have Dark Knight come up a lot of favourites, because you're right. It's just.
Well, I'm changing. I'm changing to Endgame. No, I'm not. The thing is, I think a lot of people will pick a similar movie because that movie, regardless of it being a sequel, I think would be in people's top 10 top favorite
100%.
films of all time. There is just something about the development of the character of Batman that he does in that film, but the character development he does of lots of people within that movie. But like I say, for me, like the Joker and how that was realized, and the threat and the level of tension that just comes off the screen, the twists and turns, I think Heath Ledger's performance is just one of the most frightening things I've ever seen. It's so good. I think Christian Bale holds it all together as well. I think the speech by Alfred about trying to burn the bandits out of the woods, the forest, that whole sequence, and the analogy about, some men just want to watch the world burn and all that stuff. And then I think there's something really relevant about the whole idea of police stating, and the fact that he has this system at the end that has ultimate control to be able to police state a whole place and lock down anybody they want to, and that he hands that over. And I just think it's saying so much. The fact that he took Batman international as well. I think people forget how brilliantly that was, how well executed that was. That whole sequence where he gets the guy back and, he takes Batman international, and it doesn't ever feel cheap, or it feels totally authentic and real. Yeah, I think it's really a really impressive film. And I think I had high expectations for it, but it just over-delivered on any expectation I had. It was flawless. I think I don't have a single, unlike Endgame, where there's a couple of plot points that I'm like, that quite, Ant-Man and how many times he can go small and back when he goes into the past, you're like, and then there's a couple of other things in that movie that I think are a stretch to sort of, for example, Cap goes back in time and doesn't come back on the portal, but comes back as an old man, which would suggest he's been living in that timeline the whole time. And you kind of go, but if he's been living in that timeline, wouldn't he have changed things? Or is he, Peggy wouldn't have done that. It kind of messes with the idea of. So there's lots of things in that film and I've listened to the directors and the writers try and explain them. And even the writers and the directors have a slightly different opinion on them. And it's fine. It doesn't ruin the movie for me. I don't have any questions or issues. There's nothing in The Dark Knight that I go, that's slightly contrived, but I'll buy it. It's like, actually, it's pitch perfect from start to finish. It's an incredible film.
Is there any particular scenes that you really love?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole chase. With taking Harvey Dent to the prison and that whole sort of, and the Joker in the slaughter van, and that whole sequence is outstanding. Yeah, I just think the whole movie is just like wonderful. And as a trilogy, I think the film, I was really disappointed by initially, I think, and I think it was always going to be, and I think this is one of the problems with this franchise. I think I was disappointed with Rises initially. And when I went to see it at the cinema, and I saw it twice, I think I felt slightly flat. And then I've revisited it, more recently. I like to rewatch films, and I revisited it a few times in the last sort of 5-6 years, and I've enjoyed it a lot more. And I think that's because we come to films, like I say, especially sequels, with anticipation and baggage. And it's quite hard sometimes, especially when you've had a middle film as good as The Dark Knight, which is possibly, like I say, one of the strongest films, let alone being a sequel, to then improve again on that. It's such a feat. And actually, The Dark Knight Rises is a brilliant movie. And if you look at the films as a trilogy, it's a brilliant trilogy. But if you compare them next to the middle film, which you can't help but do at the time, it's always going to slightly be flat, more disappointing experience. But actually, the movie's great.
Do you remember being really excited before it because of the build-up and the trailers?
I was excited as much as it was exciting.
The Heath Ledger's casting?
No, yeah. I didn't have any expectation for that. I've seen the Joker being done quite. I think the problem is we've never really seen the Joker being done particularly. I mean, I love Jack Nicholson's Joker, but it was more in line with maybe what I grew up with in the Adam West sort of, formula of villain in that franchise. And I'd never really seen anybody do what I think Christopher Nolan did so well. Was again, I think the Russo brothers do it as well in a way, was to take these characters and put them in our world. It feels like it exists. It feels like Gotham is very real. So I didn't have, at that point, I don't think I had any expectation about the Joker. I just was excited because I really like Batman Begins. So I was really excited to see what they did next with it. And I love Christopher Nolan as a filmmaker. So I was excited about the fact it was Christopher Nolan again. But the trailers were great. And I used to work in Birmingham on Broad Street, and we went really early to press screening or something because we knew the guy that run the Cineworld over the road. And so we were invited to an early screening. It might have even been like the night before. They did like a staff screening to check the print or whatever. And then we went again like 5 days later and watched it because it was that good. And so I remember I was excited, but it wasn't levels of excitement that I experience now. I think I feel like the Marvel franchise at the moment is, taps into that levels of excitement because I think what they're doing on the scale they're doing it. But also, Marvel. I read more Marvel as a kid. I read Marvel and I adored Marvel, and I still read Marvel. I'm currently reading House of X and Dawn of X. So Dawn of X is a new sort of alliteration of the X-Men. Yeah, what Marvel do is great. But as an adult, I think I'm ironically more drawn to DC, but also to Image and the independent graphic novels. I've just picked up a load of Hellboy stuff this week. And I think only when I watched The Dark Knight was I realized that it was tapping into kind of the graphic novels that I kind of fell in love with, around that time, The Long Halloween, The Dark Knight Returns, things like that, in terms of its tone and its levels of threat. There's a graphic novel series which was after that called Earth One, and it's phenomenal. And there's a serial killer in it that's killing loads of girls, and there's a sequence where Batman falls down this hole and lands on this pile of bodies. And the graphic novels never shied away from that with Batman, and I think that I genuinely felt that threat and that sort of that chaos, the Dark Knight, that I'd never felt before.
This is interesting, because we'll go on to your worst in a minute, because is this the Batman you always wanted when you were reading the comic books when you were younger? Or is this what you visioned?
Well, I think Tim Burton did a really great job. I really enjoyed. I grew up with Tim Burton's Batman. My Batman was Michael Keaton, and I can't wait to see what they do with it on the Flash film that they're making at the moment. No, I felt that Keaton had kind of nailed Burton had kind of done something it's quite poppy actually, but darkly poppy.
It's beautiful.
There's something still beautiful about those movies. But the thing with the Tim Burton ones is, I grew up with them. They're still when I mean poppies, they're still quite caricature, but Batman is well done. But the villains are quite because the Batman was always, and I think Tim has even said this in interviews, Batman was successful because Batman had really great villains. Like the villains in Batman were almost better than Batman.
Oh,
And I think
yeah.
you can see that in the more successful films, they really tapped into the villains and created great villains that work, well with Batman. But what Nolan did was he created a three-dimensional Bruce Wayne and Batman. Like, I think Christian Bale's Batman and the journey of that was incredible, and that's why that film sort of elevated beyond the Keaton films, because I find Michael Keaton's Batman, although he was kind of the Batman I grew up with, he's really inaccessible. You don't really ever get a sense of how he feels, what he's going through. You're quite remotely sort of watching him, and that's why you get drawn into Jack Nicholson and you get drawn into Danny DeVito, and because actually Michelle Pfeiffer, because actually he's quite unreadable, quite inaccessible. Whereas what Nolan did was create, in that first one, Batman Begins, a Batman that was wholly accessible, and you understood his choices when he was not being but actually you completely understood his journey, his reasoning, who he is. So I think that, for me, I think I'd already felt like they'd started to pull my Batman, but I still don't think we've ever seen I don't think we'll ever or have ever seen, if I think of The Dark Knight Returns, we've seen versions of it, but I don't think we've ever seen it. I'd be interested to see what Robert Pattinson and Matthew Reeves right now is probably my favorite director. I think Matthew Reeves is working in a space where he's creating really artistic films. You think of those Planet of the Apes films, War and Dawn, they're not actually summer blockbusters. They're really like beautifully, expensively told independent movies that get sold and consumed as summer blockbusters. He's the smartest director out there, one of, and I'm sort of super excited about him and what he's doing. And from what I've heard, he's doing a detective movie, because that's the other thing that there's less of. And Nolan did bits of it in The Dark Knight, the investigation of the bullet, all that kind of stuff. Starting to see Bruce Wayne use his detective and his intellect. I feel like I'm just going on a massive rant about Batman, but no, I think
no, it's about to get better.
The one we're going to talk about in the middle, your worst sequel, I've never seen before, and I watched it especially for this podcast. So
let's announce what it is. Let's go on.
So look, first of all, I need to basically, this was the hardest thing I've ever been asked, because I don't like trashing films. I don't like trashing TV series, because I feel that I know how hard it is to make stuff. And so I never like to sort of like, there's lots of films privately that I might have trashed, but doing it publicly and on the record is tricky. And so I don't like to do it. So I've kind of picked a movie that for me reflects my disappointment. And I kind of picked it because it kind of tied nicely in from talking about one of the greatest sequels for me, The Dark Knight, but probably one of my least favorite sequels of all time was Batman and Robin. For many reasons, really, as a filmmaker, I can look at it and respect that they made it, and they were really bold with it. But then for me, and we were just talking about Batman, George Clooney is not a Batman for me. He's brilliant he's so charismatic that Batman is not charismatic.
He's a better Bruce Wayne than he is a Batman.
But I don't even think he's a better Bruce Wayne, because for me, like Bruce Wayne isn't charismatic. Bruce Wayne is another mask that Bruce himself is wearing. And the reality really is that he's really Batman and Bruce Wayne is the mask. Whereas George, you always believe that he's more comfortable being Bruce Wayne. But with Batman, you should always believe that Batman is more comfortable being Batman than Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
And, and the actual, I think that's what Christopher Nolan got so successful, is those scenes with Alfred, which is, he's natural. He's not wearing was more in tune with what he was doing as the Bat. But the Bat was still like a kind of, he was still projecting into the Bat because he was trying to create this symbol. Batman and Robin, I forgave the previous one, Batman Forever, because I think what they again, those two movies, I seen them both at the cinema. I would have been really they came out 96, I think, or something. I would have been a kid, a young kid. And I remember being particularly excited about both of them. And I remember I liked Forever because I think they delivered on Robin. And I think Chris O'Donnell, saves that movie. And then I also was, at the time, I was a huge Jim Carrey fan. And I kind of went with that as well, because I think, as a kid at that age, Jim couldn't do any wrong in your eyes because you were quoting him from Ace Ventura at school. And, but as I've revisited that movie as an adult, and it doesn't hold up for me anymore. But worse than that, Batman and Robin And the problem I have with it, and I think it ties in with what I started talking about very early on when you asked me about doing a sequel, was it felt like the filmmakers on those movies didn't understand the source material. And actually their source material was the series that was done in the 80s, not the graphic novels, not the world that had been built, not the characters that had been built from the source material. And I know that the source material has got even darker over the years, but I mean, even I just, for me, there's so much brilliant stuff, and there's so much untapped stuff with Batman. Nightwing, you know, what happens with Jason, the alliterations of the Robins, like all of it's so dark. And, you know, we've seen that it's been, you know, Zack Snyder hinted at it in Batman versus Superman with the fact that, you know, you had Robin's costume with the Joker graffiti on it. And there's a sense that, you know, that Zack wanted to do something where we finally see that the Robin's murder at the hands of the Joker. And I mean, the Red Hood is a great storyline. Jason's story as the Red Hood is a great storyline. And there's so much great stuff out there. I just feel that, you know, Batman and Robin is an example of kind of, I don't know, like they kind of got away with it with Forever, and it just kind of lent too far. And I remember as a kid, I kind of enjoyed it, you know, watched it and kind of didn't think anything of it. But I also think around that time, GoldenEye came out as well, or GoldenEye came out. GoldenEye came out when one of them, like Forever, came out, because I remember literally going.
Forever was 95, and I believe.
So I think GoldenEye came out when Forever came out. GoldenEye came out, and that run of.
I would say GoldenEye came out as when Batman and Robin came out, if I had to take a guess off the top of my head.
Whenever it did, I remember GoldenEye changed things in a way that Pierce Brosnan's Bonds, the first one, GoldenEye in particular, and Tomorrow Never Dies. I don't know, there was something grounded in them and something that I think that,
GoldenEye.
Really? I was wrong. Wow. Sorry, Lewis. You were totally right.
Yeah, so Forever and GoldenEye were roughly the same time.
Wow.
So coming off the back of those and then kind of getting another kind of like, you know, seeing Arnold Schwarzenegger getting the villains doing a song dance, aren't they, in the cold or something. I don't know, bits of it just started to feel a bit too, and the one-liners don't quite work.
I think it's absolutely okay to trash this movie, being as both.
let Rich trash it for you.
There you go. I'll let you do it.
Joel Schumacher came out and apologised for this movie for a start, so I think he knew it was nonsense. George Clooney's quite famously quipped, "I think we've killed Batman," like at the end of the film, and has also been known to give people their money back who paid to go and see this movie.
Well, I'm still owed. Well, there you go, George. I'm still owed some money, and I think with inflation, you know, no.
I counted the ice puns, because that's the sort of guy I am, and I make it 28.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's a lot of puns. And I watched this with my wife, who'd seen it before, and I've never seen it before. All the way through it, she's like, "Oh God, you're gonna hate this bit. Oh, you're gonna hate this bit." And literally, the first thing she said to me was nipples, and I'm like, "What? I don't know what. I don't get the nipples thing." And then, like 2 seconds into it, I'm like, "What is this? It's just like Magic Mike." What am I watching? It was just insane.
I think it's because of hindsight as well. When you compare Bane 2010 to Bane 1997,
they look like they pumped him up with a bicycle pump.
I mean, Bane is frightening. The scene where Catwoman leads Batman to Bane and they fight, and he's like, you know, and Tom Hardy's doing the whole, you know, I was born in the dark.
In the dark.
Yeah, like, you know, you only adopted it. I was born in the dark. All that, but that whole sequence, the breaking of the back, which is famous in the graphic novels, all that stuff is just so brilliant compared to Chris O'Donnell and Alicia Silverstone in Throttled, and doesn't one of them just kick one of his pipes out of his neck or something? It's like
crazy. It's all one-liners as well. There's no actual dialogue in it. It's literally just one-liner after one-liner. There's nothing. The editing is awful. Dave and I do this other podcast all about Baywatch, and it's ridiculous. But the editing on Batman Forever, Batman and Robin, made me think of Baywatch.
Yeah,
because the editing on that is so crap. Like, we complain about the editing on it all the time, and this is the same. Like the wire work. What was with the wire work in this? Like, it's just like,
I think the biggest problem it's got is it doesn't know what it's saying. So I think with Batman Forever, you've got the whole idea of legacy, and there's a whole thing about, you know, like the burden of what Batman's doing and passing that down and allowing somebody to take that mantle. And whereas this film felt like it was saying something about fathers, but it doesn't ever really deliver on that.
It doesn't get there.
Yeah, I felt that it was. And I also don't think the villains particularly worked well together either.
I think you're being polite, Lewis. Lewis.
I am totally being polite. Like I say, I don't
know
like
it's trying to be
trashing other
comic.
people's work.
I know it's trying to be a comic, and that's okay. But you can be dark and comic. Like Batman is dark and comic. The Tim Burton Batman is comic and dark, and that's what you expect. Like the villains are comical and Batman is dark.
Yeah, but that doesn't sell toys, does it? And this one was there to sell toys.
It sold toys to me, Dave. I had Batman toys.
This was a toy advert, the whole of it.
I had a Batman lunchbox after that first Tim Burton Batman.
Yeah, I mean,
but they're thinking more of that. They're thinking
toys.
action figures. This
do
must
you
have
not,
done
do you not
it.
think that any? But do you not think any Batman film they would have put out would have got figures?
No, you're right. But this one was that prime time when everything was getting figures. Like Last Action Hero got figures, you know,
which
Jurassic
is a
Park,
phenomenal movie.
Jurassic Park were getting figures. Was it Return of the Jedi figures? They turned into Robin Hood figures. Like the base and stuff like that.
I never knew that.
A lot of toys, films are like, oh, let's just do action figures. RoboCop had figures. Terminator had toys at some point for Terminator 2. And I think that's a bloody gory film.
I suppose it ties in with the toy thing. I do feel that if you watch Tim Burton's, what they tried to do with Schumacher's 2 films was keep playing the audience younger. But the problem that they forgot was me as an audience was getting older, so I kind of grew up with Keaton and Burton, and then by the time I got to Schumacher, just about stomached Forever. But by the time I'd seen Goldeneye, I was starting to see more. It just didn't land. It really didn't.
You can make a toy advert with more gravitas than this. Like Transformers the movie, the '86 Transformers movie, probably my favorite film of all time.
Which film?
Transformers
the animation. The animation.
The '86 animation.
It's great.
Probably my favorite film of all time. It's an hour and a half toy advert. It's basically Hasbro getting rid of one line of toys.
Hey, but the first I'm a big defender of Michael Bay at times because I think there's things. He's created some of the greatest films. Some really like Bad Boys is phenomenal. The first one, The Rock, but that first Transformers movie is great.
Preach.
It really is. It really is a great film. Like,
it's all right.
I remember watching that. I remember seeing that. That was the only other time I've been in the cinema where Barricade first changed. People in the audience just went mad. It was a midnight screening.
That's the best bit. Is the animate
the whole end sequence, the whole battle in the end sequence is brilliant. It was the first time I'd watched a movie where there was like a 40-minute all-out battle. Problem is, the first one was so good that the rest just tried to up the ante in a way where it kind of lost me a bit.
Well, the second one they lost away in the writer's strike. They started a film of like that with no script, and they just making it up on the way.
And again, I also don't think they knew what they need. The problem with those movies, there's a real flaw for me, is that in every movie, Megatron had a different massive end plan. Like, so in the first one, his plan is to get the Allspark or something. Is it? I can't remember.
Yeah.
But then in the second one, his plan was never to get the Allspark. It was to go to the Fallen and to turn Earth into Cybertron. And then the third one, actually his plan was that the dark side of the moon, there was some shit that it's like, what was Megatron? Like, hang on, when Megatron turns up and he's after the Allspark, why is he after the Allspark? Anyway, so there's a whole thing in those movies where I kind of go, you've changed Megatron's grand objective every movie to suit the narrative of the movie.
And
like,
that's the whole thing. I think you were saying, is not understanding the source material and not understanding where you've come from. Because there's 400 comic books of Transformers that you can take from.
Well, I thought Bumblebee was great. And the opening in Cybertron was just outstanding.
Yeah, Bumblebee's really good, and that opening's really good too.
And like I said, the Transformers movies, like all of them are watchable. Like and I know that there was that great thing where Shia LaBeouf didn't watch all of his movies, and like during the Transformers, famously, like he did a marathon of like 36 hours.
Yeah, his ones are good.
No, but in every film, the 2 Transformers films, he just went to sleep. He just he famed, or the three of them. Those were the films he basically slept through, and the rest.
What about the other two? They are awful.
I really like Mark Wahlberg. So I rewatched, ironically, last night. I couldn't sleep last night, and so I watched Loki, and then I watched Planet of the Apes with Mark Wahlberg.
Why hurt yourself? What?
People hate that movie. I
like that
really
movie.
like Mark Wahlberg.
It's got good prosthetics. That's
the
the nicest thing I can
prosthetics
say.
are brilliant, and I mean, look, there's certain things in a movie that an actor can. Mark Wahlberg. So the first one with Mark Wahlberg, which has the dinosaurs in it. It's the first one with the dinosaurs, isn't it? That one, I kind of didn't mind that one because I really like Mark Wahlberg.
And I like the Dinobots, but it was too
Like,
long.
yeah, exactly. But all those movies are slightly too long, I think. Rich, I feel like you're a huge Transformers nerd. I'm not. So
I'm a massive Transformers nerd. I really am. So the way you are about being a Marvel nerd, I'm a Transformers nerd. But yeah, like I say, like Batman and Robin though. Thank you for putting me through that.
For bringing it into your life.
Yeah. I mean, literally, I was saying to Dave last night as I was watching it, the worst film I'd seen before that was Alien vs Predator 2, and that beats this because it's only an hour and a half long. And I had to sit and watch this for 2 hours. And
what, Batman and Robin is 2 hours?
Long.
2 hours long.
Yeah.
2 hours of my life.
I haven't seen it for years, but I can still remember all the really sort of the one. I remember the bit where he freezes Robin and he goes, "Cool off, bird boy." I remember so many of the ones.
Chill out.
Yeah,
they were definitely going for being quotable.
But that was great. Isn't there a sequence where they're in a rocket and they have to surf the doors of the rocket ship?
Oh my god!
Yeah. I'm going to rewatch it. I'm going to have to rewatch it.
I was watching it.
Do you know who's not bad in it though?
Really wouldn't work though, would it? Who wasn't bad?
It's like Uma Thurman. Everyone in this film, I would say, tries.
I don't think there's a problem with any of the actors in this movie.
What can you do with the script? I'm presuming the script is terrible.
I mean, you went to the credit card thing. You would definitely cut that out, right, Lewis?
Oh my god, the back card.
Oh, the back card. Oh god. I mean, like, but that's a serious,
never leave the house without it.
It's a serious lack of understanding and care from the source material. Like, there's no way logically a back credit card would ever work without you being out. Do you know what I mean? It just doesn't make any.
Where does he keep it?
Oh, exactly. I mean, it gets as ridiculous as, do you remember in the TV series where the shark's on their foot and he passes Robin like the bat shark spray or whatever to get the shark off the ladder? Or, it's like gets to levels of ridiculousness where he's got so many things in his bat belt for every occasion.
They're on their way to go and fight Mr. Freeze. They don't find out that the guy they're fighting is called Mr. Freeze until they're on their way. And then when they get there, they've magically got boots that ice skates pop out.
The ice skate boots, yeah.
They just have those for they wear them all the time just in case. Like, what?
Yeah. We have to talk about Alicia Silverstone just schooling in England.
She had a terrible time in this as well. But
she's quite forgettable in this.
She rocks up as Alfred's niece, and you've come all the way from England, and she's still wearing her school uniform.
Yeah, that's it. I remember
she gets changed. She does not. What's her accent? Like, she's just got a normal American accent. Like, what's that all about?
Wasn't it like Oxbridge she went to?
Yeah, Oxbridge Academy.
Oh man. Yeah, I feel sorry for them because like the actors are all great actors. It's just the film just doesn't. It almost feels like people are having too much fun on it, and people forgot to actually make
on cocaine. I would say.
Well, I mean, but it feels like people forgot.
I don't think Alicia Silverstone had fun on this movie.
She got cut out a lot, didn't she? Because they said she put on weight.
She put on weight.
Really?
So they cut her out. Yeah. She came out of it with anorexia.
That's so bad.
But I mean, I did wonder how. I was going to ask you because I haven't seen it for a while, Rich. That's how much I don't like the movie. In terms of I watch every film like 3 or 4 times, but this is one of the few that I kind of. Does Poison Ivy? I remember they kind of like those parts of that were a bit, even as a kid, was slightly awkward and slightly. Because like it's all about her sexual
seduction,
proneness and seduction, isn't it? But I remember there were bits of it that I felt were like, I don't know, like that wouldn't hold up in a 2021 gaze, basically. That you'd kind of go, that's a bit.
There's definitely fair chunks of it that you wouldn't. But then I'm desensitized from watching all this Baywatch now, so like, maybe I'm not the best person to ask because I feel like I'm in 1992 already. But yeah, I mean it didn't feel comfortable in a lot of things. But I think, like you say, Uma Thurman probably comes out of it the best.
Yeah. Well, Schwarzenegger's career took a bit of a nosedive after this because apparently he had a heart operation and no one would employ him. For
End of Days was after this, wasn't it?
That was 99. That was his next job.
I loved End of Days. Just seeing him go really dark and I just loved it, man.
That's so good. And this got only 3.8 on IMDb, which is so far the lowest film we've.
Yeah.
Really? How many votes? Do you know how many votes?
I didn't look at that.
I'm looking right now. 237,000 votes. Wow.
It's only got 3.7. Elmer Thurston's in it as well. Elmer Thurston's in this. Yeah, but she has all of 3 lines and like just stands around a lot. and doesn't speak, which is
She
probably
plays his love interest,
doesn't
doesn't she? If I'm so
Yeah,
they got rid of
she does.
Nicole Kidman. I mean, I thought Val Kilmer was not a bad Batman because I think he understood the inherent darkness more
I
in a
think
way.
he refused to come back for this movie, didn't he?
There's many stories. He was going for a divorce during
What
Forever.
he chose to go and do the Island of Dr. Monroe instead, did he? He's like, I'm not going to do Batman. I'm
I
going
think
to
he
go
did
and
The
do that
Saint,
thing with
didn't he?
Brando.
He did the Saint, yeah.
Oh,
I think.
okay.
I think he was going for a divorce during Forever, so he was angry all the time anyway.
Which is we'll talk
Which is
about
great.
later because that ties into your next choice.
Yeah.
Oh shit! Yeah, it does.
He didn't go with Schumacher, but this killed Batman. And I like afterwards, Joel Schumacher came back afterwards and was like, "Oh, I wanted to make it. My next one's going to be darker. I wanted to make the next one darker, but obviously it never got made. Obviously, you're going to say that now after that gets panned. And that wasn't it. It was going to be called Unchained at one point.
I don't know how you can take George Clooney and what he'd set up there and take it any darker anyway. I mean, like,
No.
This was voted as #1 in Empire's 50 worst films. So
Wow.
Definitely in good company. Like officially the worst film ever.
It makes you feel less bad about panning it, doesn't it? In a way,
It does,
especially
yeah.
especially when you told me that everyone involved in it has panned it. You kind of go, okay, maybe I've got a bit of license to kind of have a
I think
go.
the people that made it realised that it wasn't a good movie.
And I think R. Kelly did the song, so let's get in a
Oh.
dumpster.
I've forgotten about that as well, yeah. You know, like we do with Crystal Skull, with Indy 4, where we just pretend it never happened.
Yeah.
And I think that's what
I wonder if they're going to pretend it never happened in the new one.
sorry.
I wonder if the new one is going to acknowledge Crystal Skull or if it's just...
That's a great
I don't know
question.
how it can, because Crystal Skull never happened.
But the thing with Crystal Skull is, I don't think Spielberg thinks it's a bad film, does he? I've never heard them say anything negative about the film.
The only film I've ever heard Spielberg get negative about was Hook.
I love Hook.
And I can't understand how you can say anything negative about Hook.
I love Hook.
Yeah,
What's
Hook's
bad
great.
to say about Hook?
It's just not it's not the film he wanted to make, apparently.
Really?
But,
I think it's...
me and Lewis the same age pretty much. We must have seen it in the cinema, and I wanted to be a Lost Boy at that point, so badly.
I can still quote it like word for word. You can fly, you can fight, you can... The scene, I watched it not that long ago. The scene where Rufio draws the line in the sand and the little boy goes up to him and pulls his face and he goes, "There you are, Peter." Oh man, that scene gets me every time. And then they all stand with him and then they have the argument. It's a beautiful film.
Do you remember what one would be the most disappointing then? If you're just off the top of your head? Yeah.
So it's not like the sequel is necessarily a terribly bad movie.
No, it doesn't have to be bad.
It's just not.
You're so hyped.
Oh man.
For example, give you an example, The Matrix 2. It's not a bad film.
I loved Reload.
Okay, that's your opinion.
Do you know why?
Why?
That car chase in Reloaded.
Oh yeah, that is absolutely magnificent.
It's still possibly, other than Ronin, the greatest car chase sequence in any movie ever. It's so good, that freeway sequence.
Oh, it's great.
I saw it not that long ago. It still holds up. The VFX aren't great anymore on Matrix. In fact, they were doing too much body replacement when the body replacement wasn't quite. They looked like computer game characters.
Yeah.
I mean, RoboCop 2 was nowhere near RoboCop 1, but I wasn't old enough to be anticipating it. It was like they both, when I was old enough, they were both on VHS, so I didn't have that. It wasn't like you're waiting years for it.
So you really like Phantom Menace? What about Attack of the Clones?
Oh yeah, that must have been.
Because for me, that's the worst of all of them.
Well, I didn't love it, and then I built myself up for Revenge of the Sith.
And how do you feel after that one?
And I told myself that George had kind of saved it all for that, and that we were going to get this amazing movie of this kind of and that was possibly one of the biggest disappointments of my life.
There we go.
There we go.
Because I can still watch that movie, but it's that film actually. I remember being really upset by that film. I remember feeling really let down. I don't think I've ever felt let down by many filmmakers, because I feel like it's an art form and you can't really be let down. But I felt let down by people around him as well, no one giving notes to him and saying, really? But as a movie, that film, that would be the one I would have wanted to direct, Anakin turning into Vader and all that stuff, and how early you do that, and all of that stuff. And it just didn't. It doesn't work. It just doesn't quite. Bits of it are great, like the order on the execution of the Order of the Jedi. That sequence is really nice.
Do you know what? It hits the beats, but it doesn't probably Well, at that point, Revenge of the Sith had how many years? You knew what was meant to happen in that episode, didn't you? You knew that Yoda was going to end up in Dagobah. Obi-Wan and Anakin were going to fight. Padme was going to die. The twins were going to get separated. All the Jedis were going to get wiped off. It had a lot to do, that film, and it never, like you said, it's disappointing. Lewis, that's the correct answer.
All right, fine. I'm not gonna overcook it then. I'm just,
You look disappointed.
Oh, as soon as you said it, it's because I remember that I think like every Star Wars fan, I think we all, whenever you mention it, I think, and because I was one of the few people, because of my age, I think, that really bought into the Phantom Menace and what he was trying to do. And I kind of went with Attack of the Clones and was like, okay, I didn't feel great about it, but I was like, maybe,
He's got one more to say that.
Like, that's what I felt. I felt like he knows something we don't. And I think I realized that he didn't know anything that we didn't. And the film didn't really do or deliver. And JJ showed there was just too much reliance on VFX, because Force Awakens is stunning.
Yes, it is.
As is The Mandalorian. And it's like, I think the reliance on VFX was just so misjudged. And I get it, they were trying to pioneer in the same way they had back in the 70s and the 80s, but it's like, it's not Star Wars. It's something authentically, touchable and real.
It lost the heart, didn't it? That's the thing.
Well, when you put Yoda as not a puppet,
but then it should have been an amalgamation, because they wouldn't have been able to do the things they wanted to do. It's like some people had a problem with Yoda fighting Count Dooku and then immediately grabbing his walking stick and stuff. But bits like that, I didn't hate those choices. Those were choices that I kind of respected, but for me, it was the overall kind of, I don't know, the possibilities for that movie were endless. Wow. And I feel like other filmmakers are realizing that world far better than George was in the latter years. I think, what Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni, I think it is, have done on Clone Wars and then on The Mandalorian is brilliant. I mean, Clone Wars is really, really great. And I also, I really dig Solo. That film for me got really unfairly crushed by critics, whereas I think it's a really good film. I really like it. I think Woody Harrelson's brilliant in it. I think he's great as Solo. I like the story, and the story it's a coherent story. It works. I really like Solo. I'm going to say that on the record, because
you're allowed.
I think there are a lot of people that hate on that movie. For some reason, everybody loves Rogue One, which I really enjoyed, and hates on Solo. I think both movies work really well and are different. And what I liked about what Disney were doing, and I know there's issues that from the rumors that are out there, and I don't know if there's any truth behind them, that Gareth Edwards didn't finish Rogue One, and obviously the Phil Lord and Chris Thingy were kicked off Miller, Solo for Ron. But I like that what they were doing was they were giving parts of a franchise over to filmmakers to be brave and to just tell these stories. And I kind of feel like, I hope they don't rely solely on the TV series that they're doing now, and I hope they still do that, because I would love. I personally would like more singular Star Wars movies, because I actually feel where they were falling down for me is when they're trying to do trilogies, because the last two films of the last trilogy didn't work for me. I think Force Awakens was genius, and they didn't quite deliver on the trilogy.
They didn't know where they were going with it. They've admitted,
which is I think it's the kind of point.
It's really a problem with a trilogy.
It's like single movies work for that franchise now.
You're right.
I think, and you could do so much stuff with that world. And hopefully Disney Plus series like the Boba Fett one will be really great as well.
So you're a George Lucas fan, are you?
Well, which brings us on to our next.
See what I've done there?
Could have done it twice. You had Val Kilmer, and you also had.
Yeah, but you're such a good talker of film. It's good to let you go. Right. So, what is your dream sequel?
Man, this was really hard. And there was, and the reality is, there's loads that I came up with that I was like, they've already done it. So the Dark Crystal, I've always thought for years and years and years, I'd love to make a Dark Crystal sequel. And they did it, and it was fucking beautiful and brilliant. I don't know if you saw it as a prequel, not a sequel, but it's still.
I'm not gonna lie. I'm a little bit scared of puppets.
Oh, dude, it's
so
just,
Dark Crystal.
The Dark Crystal series. Labyrinth is my wife's favorite movie. That would be on her dream sequel list.
Oh,
but
wow.
The Dark Crystal sequels, the Dark Crystal prequel, and it's a real shame that Netflix have canned it. They're not going to do it anymore. And I'm so praying. Yeah, so
Yeah.
they the last episode was just brilliant, and they set it really beautifully up to do a massive thing, and they just and I think it's because it was so expensive to make, and I don't think lots of people watched it. I think it's the reality. So there's loads of movies that I would love to see sequels, and a lot of them are really happening already. And ironically, the one I've picked is filming right now, but it's not out yet, so I feel that's kind of like a cheat. But I adored Willow basically growing up, always thought as a kid and as a young filmmaker and a filmmaker in general that I would have loved to have done a follow-up that's set in her reign, years later. So 25 years later, she's the princess, and sort of follow that story of sort of whatever it is, that the darkness sleeping in again, and find out where Willow is, and find out where Mad Mardigan is, and but more than that, I think that the world was brilliant, and what I loved about that world was pre-Lord of the Rings, and even Lord of the Rings, there's an element of fantasy and mythical nature to the world of Willow, but it also feels quite real, and there's grittiness to it as well. And Willow is one of those films I watched again and again as a kid, and again there's a whole, like, George built worlds, and I think there's a whole world there that's really exciting.
You feel like it could almost be an Ewoks movie. It could almost be on Endor, couldn't it? It almost fits that world. Dave, you'd not seen it before, is that right?
Today was the first time.
You've never seen Willow?
Before I imagined I had. I don't know why, because just, I'm that age now, and it was that era. And then I was watching it. I was texting Rich, and I was like, I have no recollection of this. I've got a recollection of our friend Matt Hyman at uni, literally constantly going, and Willow, the great sorcerer. I couldn't remember any of it. I couldn't remember the little people. And that's not me being the wrong. I mean, the really little,
Pecs.
You know what I'm saying, right?
Oh,
No.
the fairies, the
brownies. The brownies.
Yeah.
I was like, I didn't know these were in it. I forgot it was so bloody long, to be honest. If I had seen it, that would be my one negative. And my normal question here is, would you bring the director back? So we're going to let you direct.
Ron Howard. Absolutely. If Ron wanted to come back, I'd second unit for him. But I'd quite happily take the reins off him if he didn't want to do it. I think Ron's a wonderful director. But no, I'd love to do. I mean, I would have loved to have done the series, but one day maybe. But there's plenty of things that I would like to make that aren't necessarily sequels, but I'd love to remake Jason and the Argonauts. That was another one that I grew up watching and loved. And ironically, I've got a fantasy sort of thing that I've been developing for years, which isn't a fantasy thing, that I started at university when we were at university together. There's a whole moment in it that basically riffs the music from Willow. It's like a bunch of people that love fantasy.
Oh wow!
Basically.
So I've been in your head for a while then.
Yeah, and I watched that film. I've watched that film recently because me and Ben, the writer, who's ironically from New Zealand, but me and Ben have been chatting a lot about the fantasy films, and we need this one, a homage, and Willow is one that, like Willow. I always hear that music, that great.
James Horner, wasn't it?
It is James Horner, who's one of the great. Who was one of the greats. Bless him. That music and that whole sequence of Mad Mardigan and the trolls on the bridge, and then the thing coming through the just phenomenal. The whole thing's just
it is brilliant.
Do you have a storyline in your head that you could vision if your Willow sequel? Would you have the Val Kilmer return? Do you have a separate story? Obviously, you have to bring Willow back, I guess, because it's called Willow.
It wouldn't have to be called Willow, but yes, I think and Warwick Davis is going to be in. I believe he's going to be in the follow-up. Yes, I definitely would bring that community and that world back into it, because I think that's what I loved about it as well. Was the everyman fighting at extreme odds to overcome tyranny and those kind of. That's why I loved read Lord of the Rings when I was a kid, and that idea that those sort of simple, wholeful people can change the course and destinies against even the people who should be doing it, the warriors and all sorts. That sort of idea of those people triumphing against all odds is kind of part of fiction, isn't it? The kind of the everyman fighting and I think Willow's story of kind of someone who's slightly pathetic and not the sorcerer that he wants to be, kind of realizing and reaching his destinies. And I'd just love to know where that character is. I'd love to know where Willow Upgood, I think it's Upgood, Willow Upgood, is it Upgood? Upwood.
Upgood, yeah.
Upgood. I'd love to know where he is and what he's doing. And I always remember watching that movie. I loved his relationship with his wife. Like, you really bought into this is a father who loves his family, and when he's on that quest, you really worry for. I really worry for him. I remember the sequence where he comes out it's where he's been beaten up and he's got blood on his face, and I think it's where they took a Laura Dannon and he's sort of like stumbling, and Mad Mardigan sees him. I just remember it's a film that gives me all the feels, and I think you could do it without Mad Mardigan if Val Kilmer wasn't interested. I think you could do it without Mad Mardigan. Then you could create other characters. I think that Willow is such an integral part of that movie and the heart of that movie. Mad Mardigan is such an incredible character, and he's kind of the Han Solo, but without Luke, you haven't got a movie, really.
He's so good in this, Val Kilmer.
He's so good.
Oh,
For me,
this is classic Val Kilmer.
Movie.
Well, no, Heat is Val Kilmer's best film. He's phenomenal in Heat. He is, by shadow of a doubt, this is Val Kilmer. Do you know the thing about this film and Val Kilmer's performance in it? It feels like Val Kilmer is enjoying acting and being a part of something.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen Lost Souls, the making of Dr. Monroe, the island of Dr. Monroe.
No, I've heard about it though.
Oh, it's phenomenal. It's on Amazon Prime. You can watch it. He just comes across as a really angry, like he doesn't want to be. He must have been going through stuff in his life, and obviously, his performance as Mad Mardigan is exceptional. His performance in Heat is brilliant, and that was years later, I think.
So Val Kilmer and Joanne Whaley meet on this movie and get married, and that's the divorce that you were talking about earlier.
Oh wow!
Going through. Yeah.
So when he was doing Batman, it was that divorce.
When we was doing Batman, they were getting divorced. Yeah. So that's kind of when I was saying there's a link. This is all going to come full circle. Yeah. When we're talking about him being angry in that divorce, they met on this movie, and there's such great chemistry between them in this movie as well.
Their relationship is phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's such a good Sunday afternoon film, I thought.
It's always on a Sunday on Film 4. It seems to always be on a Sunday on Film 4.
How have I missed it? Rich, have you showed this to George yet? Or
I haven't showed it to George, but actually I watched it again.
I think it'd be too scary for he's 6, right?
He's quite grown up for a 6-year-old, to be honest. He's not scared at all of Jurassic Park. I think he'll take this in his stride. But you never know, though. He gets scared of he got scared of Raya, the dragon thing, the other day. So
I watched that
Dragon Rider. But yeah, I think he'll like this. And I love how he has kind of his favourites. So like Pat Roach, who's in Raiders of the Lost Ark. He's the big guy that Indy fights and gets chopped up by the plane, and he plays General. How do I say it? General Cal, the guy that makes the
guy with the skull mask. Yeah,
the skull mask.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And which was really weird because he was in Our Wiedersehen Pet. Like I was thinking of him as
Boomer or whatever his name was.
Yeah, Boomer. Yeah, that's right. And there's just bits in this. I just watched it again, and I think I remember why I loved this so much. As a kid, and we're talking about it, Dave, before you watched it, and I was saying it's in that run of Ron Howard movies where he could literally do no wrong at the end of the 80s. So he made like Splash and Parenthood, and
has Ron Howard made a bad movie? I don't know if he has.
I don't know, actually. I can't think of one. Thinking now.
I would say some of the Da Vinci Codes series. If I had to be. But
I've not seen the sequel. I must confess that I've seen the first one. I didn't see the
There's 3 of them now.
There's Inferno, and there was another one, wasn't there?
Inferno was the last one. Angels and Demons was the second.
Angels and Demons. So I've seen the first 2. Then I haven't seen the one with Felicity Jones, which is Inferno.
I never read the books. I was never really bought into them. So when I watched those movies, I didn't hate them. I thought they were right.
I didn't. I genuinely don't think there's a Ron Howard film I don't like.
Not that I'm trying to prove you wrong.
Well, no, I mean, I genuinely don't think he's a filmmaker who has.
He's very good.
It's like that bit in The Simpsons where he pitches Homer's movie about like back in time for some reason, and his friends are talking pie, and the producer's like, "Howard, you've done it again!" Hands him loads of money. Like he literally make anything.
Yeah,
I have got one, and it's going to surprise you which one it is. It's called The Dilemma with Vince Vaughn and Kevin James in it, and it's like a rom-com.
I don't know if I've seen that.
It's not great. It's got Jennifer Connelly in. It's like one friend knows that his best friend's wife's cheating on him, and it's a dilemma to tell him.
Oh, okay. I've not seen that.
But he's done some. Frost Nixon's great. Cinderella Man's great.
Phenomenal.
Beautiful Mind's good. Everyone loves The Grinch Who Stole Christmas. I have to watch it once a year because my wife loves it so much.
I like Rush, In the Heart of the Sea.
Apollo 13, Ransom.
Cinderella Man. Yeah, A Beautiful Mind. I love, like you say, Grinch, Cocoon.
That's another one in the late 80s
He's consistent, isn't he?
Absolutely.
He's one of those directors that can roll with the times. that
And he was
has seemed
early 30s when he was making these movies, when he was directing these movies.
First
like
ones,
1980, and like, it wasn't very old making these movies. Like,
no.
it's impressive. I know this is your pod, Lewis, and we're talking to you about your
No,
things. I want to know what Dave's feelings are about Willow, because I've never met someone who's not seen it before.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know what you thought.
I think I would have really, really loved it if I saw this when we were young. I'm going to put it in the same camp that I put Princess Bride, which will make a great companion piece for this.
What, did you never see The Princess Bride until recently?
I've watched it in the last probably 5 years. I've tried watching it a few times. I enjoyed Willow. I had a lovely time with it. I thought it was too long. I did. It's delightful. All those kind of words. Lovely afternoon romp. But it's too long.
Oh, I don't think. I think it's perfect.
Even some of the CGI, I thought was, look at what they've tried to do here. It looks
CGI in this is better than the CGI in Batman and Robin.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And this is 10 years before that.
I mean, isn't it Industrial Light and Magic in their prime though?
Yeah, I think it was. It was definitely there.
Yeah.
No, I'm glad. I think, as like I said, if I saw it when we were young, I think I'd have been all over this. Fantasy, I love it.
No,
I've got friends now who have just watched The Goonies and doesn't like it, and I can't get my head around not liking it.
I can understand that. I can understand, like, if you saw it now.
Let's turn this off then.
No. I love The Goonies, but I can understand if someone saw it now without the sort of the nostalgia. It might not hold up as well as it did. Like, there's a lot of it that works, but it's quite cheesy that you get away with. But you get away with it because of the nostalgia. I totally could understand people watching it now and not sort of understanding what the deal is, because now we've got stuff like Stranger Things as well, which kind of does similar things to what that did, but it's kind of it's fresh and new and it's up to date in terms of the way it looks and feels. But The Goonies is, anyone that's seen The Goonies, you'll never lose that. But I think it would take a special kind of like kid/adult to watch it and sort of like have that same feel that we have and that association we have to it.
It's a weird one. Another one that they've never done a sequel to, and I can kind of.
I'm so glad they haven't. I'm so glad they haven't. I hope they never touch The Goonies.
Do you not reckon a Disney Plus TV series?
No, it's untouchable. You can't recast those people. Like, you just can't. Like, and I don't want to see another gang of kids. It's a Stonewall classic that should never be touched.
It would almost be like what you said about It Part 2. Is that they'd have to do it with adults and it wouldn't work. Like,
did you not think It Part 2 worked?
I thought It Part 2 wasn't as scary as the first one because it's harder. It's harder to. I think scaring children is scarier.
Yeah, I'd agree. The first one is a better film.
And then the second one, again, not that I don't like long films, because I love Lord of the Rings is literally my favorite film. But I think It Part 2 went on for too long. Yeah,
I don't disagree. I think it was quite. Again, I think it was slightly formulaic as well. I think the idea of each character having a set piece that it just kind of. But I felt that the ending was really satisfying. I thought that the whole sort of confrontation of him in his den. And that whole sequence, I really enjoyed. It
was better than the TV movie with the big,
with Tim,
odd looking the dragon.
Sorry,
the spider, not the dragon.
The spider, yeah. It was well. I didn't, as two movies together as a sort of overall film, it works really well.
It would be interesting to watch it together. I think if you just sit down in the afternoon. I'm not brave enough to do that because I'm a little bit afraid of clowns as well. So
clowns and puppets.
So if we get a puppet clown,
and dinosaurs,
you're going to freak out.
I tell you what really freaks me out. I think it's Poltergeist. Is it Poltergeist 1 or 2? When the puppet clown comes alive that's on the chair in the store.
I don't remember that.
Fucks me.
Do you ever see a horror series called Puppet Masters when we were kids?
We never watched that.
Yeah, there was a whole series about these puppets that like came alive, and it was freaky as hell.
Nope. I used to really dig horror when I was little. I watched all the classic horrors, like when I shouldn't have done. The older I'm getting, I'm just not enjoying them as much. I don't know why.
I must admit there are certain horror films I won't watch because I don't, especially with kids, where I don't need that. I don't need that in my head. There's certain sort of films. I've never seen Paranormal Activity, and I'm not a massive believer in that kind of stuff. But I ironically saw a bit of it on Gogglebox.
That's the best place to watch movies.
Well, the bits I saw, like that night, I had to look after the baby, and it was awful. It was awful. I kept, seeing things, and of course, baby monitors are the scariest thing anyway.
Yeah.
Oh my god, baby monitors should be illegal because babies are bastards, right? Because you'll be
That's the
listening to
quote of
Baby
the
Monitor.
episode.
You'll have this to come, Dave. You'll be listening to Baby Monitor and Baby will be going, ah, da, 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 da. You're like, oh, that's really cute. Isn't that cute? Then they go, you're like, what? And then they go, ah, da, 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 da. You're like, bastards.
Do they ever just start talking like someone else is in the room?
Yeah, like
That freaked me out.
my daughter came into our room once and still kind of does it every now and again, and like she was like got into our room and was like, oh, I don't want them looking at me, I don't want them looking at me, and it's just horrible. Like you're like you both just kind of go but it's like it is just that they're like us, they're having dreams, and she's half asleep still, basically. It's not, but it's horrible. In the moment, it's not, and they talk to themselves in their sleep. And the reality is you are slightly scared, but nothing would stop you not going in that room. That's the thing. It's like, I thought before I had kids that if there's certain things that scared you, you'd be like, hell, you watch movies, you're like, don't go in there. But the reality is like, you have to go in there. You go straight in.
Is it Impossible, the tsunami movie?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I tried to watch that, but when George was like 2 months old, couldn't do it.
Yeah, there's certain films I can't watch now as a father. Yeah. It took me, if there's any, like, there's a TV series called White House Farm that's now on Netflix, and I've been meaning to watch it.
I watched it.
I've been meaning to watch it for ages because we worked with the same company that made Des, and that they were making it at the similar times, and I couldn't watch it because we'd had my daughter was a year old, and I knew what happened in the opening scene. I knew that the 2 kids got killed, and I just didn't. I've watched it now, but couldn't bring myself to watch it for so long because like your experience changes when you become. It sounds mad, but it really does. Like I mean, I never cried. I'm not a massive crier, but when I had my daughter, if I watched DIY SOS now, man, I'm just like a wreck. Just like
That
happens to all of us, I think.
I think that's come with age. I'm finding myself more emotional watching more things. My missus like looks over at me and I'm tearing up over the stupidest thing. I mean, I've cried at Sister Act 2 for some reason. That made me cry once.
Great sequel.
Great sequel. I was at home alone. I was like, those kids have worked really hard to get there, and they're really proud of them. Joyful.
I even felt a little bit off about Stranger Things when I first watched it. I was like, said to my friend, it's brilliant, but I'm never letting George out of the house ever again. That's he's going to be 35 before I let him out the door.
No, you'll get rid of him before then, believe.
And now he's 6. I'm like, he can go. It's fine.
As soon as they get to teenagers.
And that was Lewis Arnold's Unequal Sequels. It was really good to talk to Lewis, wasn't it, Dave?
Yeah, I really enjoyed that one. I think I say that most episodes now, but I did also enjoy talking to Lewis. Yeah, it was great catching up with him.
Yeah, it really was. And we talked for a long time. Dave had to really earn his money as an editor on this one, because I think we talked for about 2.5 hours and managed to cut it down to an hour's worth of podcast.
There is an uncut episode, but it goes into really random conversations between just 3 friends. So there was a lot I could have got rid of, but the stuff I kept in, he's really good, and he loves films, doesn't he? He absolutely
really
loves them, and he loves Marvel. Someone at Marvel, give that man a job quickly, because he would knock it out of the park. He'd be brilliant at it.
Definitely want Lewis directing a Marvel movie. Absolutely.
Or TV series. He'd be quite happy with a TV series.
TV series. Oh, I'm really enjoying Loki at the moment.
Loki is good,
Lewis would be really good at doing a gritty one, a gritty kind of darker Marvel TV series.
Yeah, I think he'd be really
That'd
good
be
at
good.
that.
Yeah.
But yeah, his knowledge and his passion for film, that's why I think his TV works so good, and that's why how he's done so well since leaving university, because you could tell you could tell at uni he was going to be brilliant.
You could. There are those people in the world where they're just naturally ahead of everyone else, and I think he always kind of stood out as being one of those people that just was ahead of everyone else.
Yeah,
like we tried hard, didn't we, Dave? But
different levels.
I think just a level of natural talent that Lewis has that we just don't possess.
Yeah, so if you enjoyed our conversation with Lewis, like we really enjoyed it, you can listen to our other conversations with other people like Helen O'Hara and Sean Walsh and many others. Depending on when you listen to this, we've got more coming. You can check us out on all the podcasting platforms. We're everywhere, and we're on Twitter and Instagram at Unequal Sequel. So yeah, come join the Unequal Sequel party. It's good fun. We're enjoying it.
Yeah, we really are. It makes a nice change because we do another podcast as well called the Baywatch podcast. That is essentially weeks and weeks of episodes of me absolutely hating what we're having to watch. And it's really nice to do this podcast because I really enjoy it. I've watched so many more movies than I would have done normally.
Yeah.
And I'm just so happy about it. Even when I've watched movies that I don't necessarily like, thank you very much, Pirates of the Caribbean 2. But, even when I've watched rubbish movies.
So our main episodes come out on Monday. They're always the interview episodes. And then Unequal Sequel Extra. Thank you. Comes out every Friday. And they are always related to some kind of sequel related.
Yeah. And this Friday's will be a very good one.
Yes, it will be. It will be a review episode. I think I can tell what it's going to be. It's going to be Black Widow. You've all had a chance to watch it now, either on the cinema or on Disney+. So if you feel like telling us what you think, let us know. Get in contact with us at Twitter or Instagram or our email, which is unequalsequel@hotmail.com.
And also, I think we're going to have an extra episode with Lewis again, aren't we? Just to talk about directing and his TV work and all the cool stuff that he's done. And just because it's really good to listen to him, really.
His episode's mainly going to be about his experience on Time, and he's got some stories about Stephen Graham and Sean Bean and what he's doing now. I would say that episode hopefully will come out Wednesday if you're listening to this on Monday.
Oh, we can have an extra. Oh, extra.
It's got absolutely nothing to do about sequels. So
it's just an extra.
It's just going to slip in there.
We couldn't leave bits of this 2.5 hour conversation. And it was just too much gold in there. There's just too much gold, and we couldn't let you not listen to it. So
I think we should also mention Lewis's website that he put together in lockdown for all you wannabe directors out there. It's called Directors Now, and you can find it at directorsnow.com. And basically, I'm going to read the bio, and then you can. Directors Now is a free document, an online resource that brings together the breakout stories of 100 directors currently working in the industry today. So if that interests you, check it out, Directors Now. That's all I've got to say. You got anything else to say, Rich?
No.
That's a goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me. Bye.
See you next week. Bye.